So just discovering that you can raise your hand and also lower your hand again if you want to say anything, then it will flag you up. Okay. Rosemary from Cork.
Hi, how are you?
So, who's got a copy of the book? So that's good. So
mine is arriving in the post, so I haven't been able to read it. So yeah, I'll just have to join in.
Yours is arriving. That's fine.
It's arriving in the post at some point. Yes.
Excellent.
Acknowledgement yesterday.
Yeah, you just ordered it. That's brilliant. Yes. So who hasn't got the book as a matter of interest? Who hasn't? A few people who haven't. No problem. Absolutely. You're very welcome. Yes. And I think most of you are Alexander Technique teachers. Is anyone here a trainee at the moment? Mahima, great. Yes. And Julia and Borit, excellent. A few trainees. And is anyone here a pupil, a student who's just taking lessons, but not actually actually a trainee or a teacher? No, nobody. And is anyone not in the Alexander world at all? Is anyone who's a yoga teacher? I know, Andrea, you're a yoga teacher, but you're also an Alexander teacher. But is anyone not an Alexander person at all? No, not today. Good. So you all know about the Alexander work. That's good. So I'll talk for 15 minutes or so, and then we'll open up the discussion and we'll see where it takes us. So just to tell you a little bit about me first, I started doing a zoology degree because I've always loved animals and movement. I was also always dancing, but that was hobby rather than, I wasn't ever good enough to dance professionally. So I went into zoology, but I was always interested in living animals. The minute they were dead, I wasn't interested. And so I then went on and started a PhD, and I was absolutely in the wrong place, and I started to crack up. And fortunately, my back seized up before my mind broke down and took me to my first Alexander lessons, which averted the crisis. And they were wonderful. They were very gentle and didn't demand anything of me. They were Carrington lineage teachers that I worked with to start with. And it averted the crisis. And I very quickly realized I wanted to train. I ended up at a McDonald's school with Misha Magidov. And so 6 years later, I had qualified and started a practice. Everything going well, but within a few months, I couldn't cope. Somehow my use had fallen apart and I didn't understand what had happened. And I tried going back to my old favorite teachers, and it just, I wasn't getting what I needed. And I thought I need new information here. And at that point in London, one had a choice of first generation teachers. And I went to Miss Goldie because John Hunter, who'd been the main assistant on the training, went to Miss Goldie, and I very much admired his work. So I turned up on her doorstep and, stood in front of the chair and was duly received the lesson. And she lost no time in telling me that I knew nothing about the technique and that my use was appalling. She picked up very quickly that my beautiful straight back, which was, as far as I was concerned, a strong McDonald back. I think I put on 7 pounds on my muscle on my back in just the first term of training. My back rippled. And she told me it was a weak back. And she collapsed it, and I was back in a slump, which was, none of us trying to teach. And suddenly I knew nothing, which was pretty throwing, but it felt like the right place to be. And so I kept turning up for the lessons, and she was teaching me to come to quiet and teaching me to stay out of her way so that she could work on me without me interfering. I was really not to feel, I was to stay, my mind in the brain, I was to keep out of the way, let things happen. taking it to a much deeper level than I'd had before. But I still wasn't doing anything for myself. And she challenged me on lesson 6. She went straight in on lesson 6. She said, I don't know why you bother to come. You haven't begun to think for yourself away from here. And she had me in tears all lesson. And there was part of my head thinking, I could walk away from this. I don't need this. And then another part of me kicked in and said, I'm going to show the old bat. So I'm glad that part kicked in. So what happened was that I went home after that lesson and I was going to make a cup of tea. And instead of just picking up the kettle, I stopped and came to quiet and just looked at the kettle and let myself really come to quiet as she'd taught me, and not organize my hands to move, but just bring my mind to the brain and just see out. And then I moved and my hand just moved and encountered the kettle in a completely different way. The movement that then occurred was like nothing I had ever felt before. It just happened. It organized itself. And I've been teaching that ever since. I went back next week, all excited and ready to tell her about that. And she already knew. She knew it had happened. And at that point, I was in. And I was then on a 30-year journey, really, to understand what was going on here. Because it wasn't only that remarkable experience that was so different, but she organized me in a different way. She was doing moves on me that I'd not felt before. And as I say, I'd worked with both Carrington and McDonald teachers. Nobody had taken my shoulder with quite such a twist on it and really twisted my arm and brought me into a place with my hands that had more tone and a different biomechanical balance than anything I had experienced. It's like, what is going on here? It brought life into me. It brought springiness. I was not to switch off. She made me realize that, you know, I just wanted to release my shoulders. I've always learned, you know, release your shoulders, release your shoulders. She didn't want me to release my shoulders. She wanted more tone in them. She wanted more tone in my back. And it was so different. So I worked with her for 4 years and moved to Sheffield, away from London, which made it harder to get back. But I started to ask, you know, what was so different about this work? And then John Hunter did a series of workshops. He was asking exactly the same question, having worked at that point not only with Goldie, but also quite a lot with Erica Whittaker. And so he brought Erica Whittaker over, and she taught us to lead from the eyes. Again, this self-organizing, just looking at something and staying out of the way, bringing more tone in. So there was a number of the same themes taught slightly differently. She taught us how Alexander put hands by using his eyes. It's like, wow. So by then I was on a quest to find out what was different here. What was being missed, what was being lost. It didn't quite know what happened. So it took me to all sorts of places. I was already doing natural vision work. Eventually ended up with doing some of Peter Grunwald's work. It took me to craniosacral therapy and the understanding of fascia, which introduced me to Thomas Myers and the anatomy trains of myofascia and how posture is organized. It took me to Bob Britton, who introduced me to functional anatomy. I was already doing breathing Alexander's way with John Hunter, and I then did some work with Jessica Wolfe. Philip Shepherd and deep embodiment work was another part of it. And they all gave me little more pieces of the puzzle. And my own yoga teacher, actually, who does a lot with the pelvic floor and the core. And that also was part of Goldie's work. How did that fit? I'd always, so we then moved to Ireland. That was in 2005. And I was very ill. So I'd always had chronic fatigue syndrome from after glandular fever when I was 17. And I'd had various big bouts, but after we moved to Ireland, I had the biggest bout of all. And I was pretty well bedbound and certainly housebound for well over a year. And when I finally came out of that, it was very scary. I needed to build a lot of strength back because I'd actually not been able to do aerobic exercise, for 30 years, for 20 years at this point, probably almost 30 years. And I found a therapy called mycotherapy, which actually helped me clear the chronic fatigue. And I then set about rebuilding. And I did yoga, I did swimming, but I kept using Goldie's directions, the non-doing, the coming to quiet, letting the body organize itself, rather than me organizing it through my directions, letting it organize me. And I kept waiting for the strength to come back in, and it didn't. And I realized I didn't know how to do that bit. And then I met Rosa Luisa, and she told me, go to Jando Massuero. Has anyone not heard of Jando? He's a French teacher, and he was asking the same question as me. How did Alexander discover the technique? And Goldie gave me one answer to that in this letting the body organize itself around an activity. And that was how she told me he discovered the technique. But Jando was asking the question from the biomechanical point of view, because after all, Alexander writes things like pull to the elbow. How did he pull his own elbow? So, and he's very interested in biomechanics, and he's also very interested in constructive conscious control. So I did some lessons with him online, which was a new experience in itself. And so he worked entirely through giving me directions. It was totally constructive conscious control. I had to think it and then bring it about, but he didn't just want me thinking it, he wanted me giving myself a pull to the elbow was the first one we did. And it was strong, it was really strong, and it felt all wrong. It's like part of my head was going, this isn't Alexander work. And he, in fact, was waiting for me to just finish the lesson and walk out on him, because so many senior teachers had done that, saying, this isn't Alexander technique. And I didn't, because about halfway through the lesson, I realized he's getting me to do for myself what Miss Goldie did for me, this rather strange move that she would do. And there he was teaching me to do it. So I was really fascinated, and I worked with him for a year. And by the end of that year, I had the clues to how Miss Goldie integrated me biomechanically, why it was such a different biomechanical difference. And also I came strong very quickly. I could do the moves that my daughter had shown me how to do, because she's really into fitness and core, and so she could, go into a plank and then lift one arm and lift one leg, and I would just sag if I did that. And suddenly all my muscles were engaged and I could hold it. I could do any of these moves and the core muscles were there and they just snapped into play. So that was very intriguing. And I got my strength back and my springiness back, felt 10 years younger. I recommend it. And Alexander was all about elasticity. Where had that gone? So that was a real missing link. And I then put what Jando had done together with the Myers anatomy trains that I'd read about to work out the anatomy of that. And by then I was already in writing the book and working with a group of people here, local people, and we were brainstorming and playing around. And that's when the center of the book really came together. So it was incredibly exciting. And then I started to ask, of course, as part of writing, what's the science behind this? Because Goldie's work was so precise. I always felt there must be some good science to explain why that kettle moment happened and what was the anatomy behind things. But the precision of the movement, I felt there must be neuroscience behind that. So I did a lot of reading on neuroscience as well. And No wonder Alexander couldn't explain that, though, because that science is only 20 years old, at the most 30 years old. So no wonder he sort of fudged his answers for so long, because he didn't have that neuroscience, he didn't have functional anatomy. And I think we can now put understanding on that. So the book came together, and as you will know, it's called The 12 Fundamentals of Integrated Movement. So here's the 12 fundamentals. Can everybody see that? Yes, we've got the physical fundamentals. I don't seem to have the whole, can you see the whole thing? So we've got the physical fundamentals, which is up at the top here. We've got those muscle trains, the kinetic groups, which self-organize with gravity and other forces. Biomechanics is in response to external forces on the body. But then you've got tensegrity, this other idea that everything connects to everything else through the fascia, and that's a sort of baseline organization within the body. And then you've got the spiral arrangements of muscle linkages that the Tai Chi people talk about a lot. And if you put all those together, what you get is a functional body that morphs into movement. And for a lot of people around movement, that's, if they're thinking about integrated movement, that's as far as they'll go. But as we know from Alexander, that is not the whole story. You've got to put the sensory fundamentals with that as well. Exteroception, in other words, the sight and the sound and the external inputs on our bodies, and the interoception, the one people don't really talk about, is our internal drives, our hunger, our thirst, our desire for friendship. Those are what actually impel us to move. And proprioception, of course, which, as we know, is crucial, which is the sensing of our own bodies. And you put all those together and you get a spatial awareness of all the sensory input, all happening together, an expanded field of awareness, as Frank Pierce-Jones called it. And even that isn't enough, because you've got to put the consciousness fundamentals in there as well. You need a calm nervous system to come aware. You need to be in that parasympathetic, that calm place, without which learning can't happen. We can't really properly integrate. And then you need embodiment, something that we don't talk about enough in the technique, I think, and embodied intelligence, because the whole body is intelligent. Your hand knows what to do if it's embodied. But we also need this paradox. We need to be out of the way, not feeling into the body. And Miss Goldie called that mind in the brain, the separation of the consciousness and the physical. But these two go together in a strange way. Miss Goldie, Missy Vineyard called this coming into your attic. And when you put all those together, then you can make an embodied conscious choice with a focus of intent. You can choose, you can feel the desire to pick up your cup of coffee and make a choice to do it and let the whole body respond. And then you get, if you put all these together, you get an integrated movement in relationship to life, like I had with my kettle. So that's a lot of information I've just thrown at you there. I asked myself, how do animals keep their necks free? You know, they don't go around saying, dogs don't go around saying, free my neck. When a cat is going to pounce on a mouse, is stalking the mouse, it's the sight of the mouse, it's all that external influence that organizes the cat into all the stages of that amazing stalking, stopping, waiting for the right moment, and finally the pounce. And it's all organized in response to the mouse. Not by me thinking, I'll free my neck and now I'll move and now I'll pick up my coffee. So there's a lot of turning things on its head here. And perhaps I'm portraying the modern technique a bit crudely here. And if I am, I apologize, but I'm taking the sort of the way it can, you know, the misunderstandings that I think have grown up over the years. So the book is full of self-explorations. I think there's 200 self-explorations and lots on the thinking processes, on the biomechanical processes, putting it together to find this integration in the system that brings in more strength, but it also brings in the precision. There's the non-doing and yet the strength. I found a wonderful quote about FM's hands, that they were strong as steel and yet soft as a breeze. Now, most of us know how to do the soft as a breeze, but do we know how to do the strong as steel while still being soft as a breeze? And that was also something that puzzled me about Miss Goldie. She could be soft as a breeze, she could be strong as steel. There's so much I think we're uncertain about. And of course, we don't just move from the head down. You know, we've got this primary control, which has been defined here. But if you listen to Tai Chi people, they say that everything is moved from the dantian, and Philip Shepherd puts it even lower in the pelvic bowl, that movement is organized from the pelvic area. And then if you listen to Peter Grunwald, movement is organized through the eyes. And footballers will tell you their minds are in their brains are in their feet. So they feel themselves organizing through their feet. So we can organize from all these different places. How do we put that in? Primary control is not the whole answer. And I think science can start to give us the sense of this one. So, and then of course, there's natural breathing, because Alexander started with breathing. For the first 14 years, he was teaching natural breathing. He wasn't teaching the technique. He was teaching natural breathing. And also, I think he was teaching Delsart work. But that's work I'm doing at the moment. So the book got published. As some of you will have seen on the Facebook group, I then got a hammering last year from one person in particular who went through my book with a fine-tooth comb and marked it off against his own Carrington training. Cross, 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 cross. There are those who don't like looking at new discoveries, who find it threatening that I'm suggesting there are things that got lost. But to me, we always need to approach this work with an open mind. Alexander said at the end of his life, I'm only halfway through. There's more to discover. Goldie would say, don't wait for the teacher to tell you, you discover it for yourself. And there is so much more to discover. I've discovered a lot in collaboration with all these people, and there's more to discover yet. So over to you. Let's hear some responses. People might have come with questions, and who would like to set the ball rolling? Mahima.
My question is, actually, you mentioned there's about 200 explorations in the book, and I wondered whether you would do.
Can everybody else mute, please?
I'm sorry.
Thank you. That's all right.
Yeah, I wondered if you would do a video course or a place where we could either access or purchase the whole series, because I was thinking to myself, it's really helpful to be able to just dip into them more frequently without needing to pick a particular exercise, scan it, and then so I just wondered whether you had in mind a place where we could access a lot of them together, whether included with the book or a course to be purchased separately, or
Well, that's a very good point. Thank you. And there are two ways of doing that at the moment. One of which is that I have begun. You might have noticed the front of the book, the inside cover. There's a big advert for the video courses, and actually there's only the first 3 practical chapters got done so far. But you can purchase chapters 3, 4, and 6. Which gives the basic fundamentals. They are done and available. I'm hoping actually to begin on the rest quite soon. That I'm starting to put. Thank you for coming, Alex. I'm glad you made it for this far. Yes, I'm hoping to video number 7, because there's a lot of new ways of accessing the polls now, and that actually I think are more accessible, makes it easier to multitask them in different directions. So I want to put that together, and then to do the same for the feet and walking chapters, and do the other chapters. So yes, it is in the pipeline, but yeah, it just hasn't happened yet.
No, but thank you. I didn't realize some of the chapters were already available, so I will look them up. Thank you.
Yes, they're on my website in the shop section. Yeah, they're there. And then, of course, there's the Book Study Club, which is the one that people are doing. And this is also what I wanted to talk about today, was that because the next group starts in a couple of weeks' time on Monday the 30th, and we take the whole book slowly, and we work through all of it together online in seminars, and those who can't get to the seminars can follow on the recording. Are
these on your site as well?
Yes, the Book Study Club's on the site, and you'd be very welcome on it, because I know you've been intrigued. Yes, so we've got 5 groups. Well, the first group has actually just completed, and I didn't know originally how long it would take to get through the entire book with a group of teachers, some trainees, a couple of pupils. And I thought maybe 9 months. Actually, it's taken 21 months. It's been, and you know, most of them are still with me. It's been wonderful. Some people had to drop out, of course, but most of them have followed right through to the end. It's been just an amazing journey to go all the way through the book, and taking it slowly means there is plenty of time to integrate, because there is so much new stuff that for a lot of people, and some people are saying, oh yes, this is like my training, but I didn't understand it. And some people are saying, wow, this is new. I never experienced that. So people have different experiences of what's new and what isn't, because there is such a breadth in our world now. So yes, thank you, Mahama. Henry George, hello. Yeah.
Hi, Penelope. I've changed my name, so it might be confusing you.
Ah, you were Henry Fagg.
Yeah, I've changed my surname.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I love the book, and I have very little time at the moment, so I haven't had a chance to really delve into it, but I know there's so much wonderful stuff in it. My question is really about the criticism that has been leveled against you. I'm very unlikely to purchase the tract that has a go at your work. So can you say something about it? And I mean, I'm sure it's been quite an emotional roller coaster for you, but it's sort of standing back from all of that. Can you see something in the criticism that has made you change your mind about anything, or on something on those lines?
Thank you. Yes, I think that's why it's been such a journey, because I mean, as I said, he's been through the book line by line with a tick and a cross, and some of it is just, well, quite a lot of it is just that he's because he's taken it line by line, he's missed the bigger arguments. But it's made me realize what needs more clarification. And last year also, we were working on the German edition. So there were a number of things I think that weren't said clearly enough, like at the start of every exploration, remember to come into spatial awareness first. Remember that you're not just copying the pictures, but you are finding it for yourself with the directions. You're not just trying to bring about something you can see. So I think he highlighted a number of things that I probably didn't phrase well enough in the book. So that was one thing. And another thing is the big one is he made me look at the history, because there are actually a number of inaccuracies in the history. For instance, Janda discovered that Delsart's brother emigrated to Tasmania and was in Tasmania and Melbourne, and so presumed that Alexander learnt Delsart work from him or from his followers, because he would have died by then. Actually, there's no evidence for that, and I don't now think that's the route. So there's some minor things in the history that were simply wrong, but the big one he challenged me on was that I wasn't able to that I didn't give any evidence for what I said, because it's a rewriting of the history that doesn't actually, then there's no backup in there. And the reason for that actually is that the history was one of the first things I wrote. I wrote quite a long history chapter based on Jando's original podcasts with Robert Rickover, if anybody heard those. And because it was so revolutionary, and I sort of just promptly penned a chapter myself of how I then saw the history. As we got closer to the book being written, I started to realize that there were quite a number of inaccuracies in that. And I wanted to take time. I started to delve into what I needed to look at and realized it was a much bigger project than just a sort of a weekend quick have a look here. And I had a choice in that last year before the book was published to prioritize either the history or the science and get the science really, spot on. And I chose to prioritize the science. But my thought was that once the book was at the publisher, I would actually have a year's grace, because they told me it would take a year actually to take it through to publication. And I thought I have time there then to get into the history. But what happened was that COVID broke and I was into online teaching, and I more or less didn't have time to brush my hair for the next year, because I was, writing courses, delivering courses for teachers who wanted to learn to work online using the material from the book. And so I never did get round to redoing that history. And so I knew there were inaccuracies in it when it went to print. These critical tract, and the other one as well, Jean Fischer wrote a critique just of the history section, which is not unpleasant in the same way this other one is. And it's a much more intelligent discussion, and if I can say that, and says at the end, and I hope this will be addressed in any second edition. And I wrote and thanked him for it, actually, because it highlighted what I needed to look at. And I'm now, for the last year, I've been researching the history. And actually, there's a whole new book on the way, because it's turned up all sorts of things. It's really exciting. And I think I am finally starting to answer questions like paradoxes, like, did Alexander develop the technique in 18 months or 40 or 10 years? We were always told 10 years, but actually, when you actually look at when he started work, it was only 18 months after the voice. So did it only take 18 months? Did it take 10 years? And I think the answer is both, because his discovery wasn't initially the head, neck, back. Despite what it says in Use of the Self, that was the bit that took 14 years to find. That's why he dates the technique from, Alexander dates the technique from the point at which he discovered that, which I think was about 1908, when he first starts to write articles that look like the Alexander technique. Before that, he was using breathing. And his big discovery, his monumental discovery, that was you don't focus on the in-breath, you focus on the out-breath using inhibition. And that gave him a self-organizing mechanism around breathing. And that's actually what he was doing for the first 14 years. So that's huge, because it really puts breathing center stage of the technique. And that's another thing I think we've lost. So there's a huge amount of work going on there. And, in a sense, those two critiques put the boot up my backside to get on and do that historical work. And that's, in a sense, why I'm thanking them. There's another one around knees, because again, he went, every time I write knees forward, he put a cross through and said, no, that's knees forward and away, which of course is what we've always learned, knees forward and away, but knees don't always go forward and away. And again, the way I've described it in the book is you need a balance of forces in that knee. You want the knee tracking over the foot. You don't want it going further out from the foot. So you want a balance of both of the muscle chains that do that and the muscle chains that do that. And if you have a balance of both the forces that are taking the knee out and the forces that take the knee in, then the knee will go straight forward. And that's why I only write knees forward. Now, maybe I didn't clarify that enough, but that's, so that, and then there's a whole load more anatomy around why the knee actually only goes outwards half the time. The other half of the time, when you bend, when you stay straighten up, it's actually coming the other way. So there's been a lot of anatomy learnt as well as a result of these criticisms. And then a whole load more on the pulls of how do we use them in a more integrated way, which has been my question all along, really, is, you know, how do we integrate them with the kettle moments, as it were? Because it's like I had two sides. There's the kettle moment where the technique does itself, and then the pulls where you do it for it. And I think Goldie and Alexander really were using those together, and that's still emerging. That's coming. I'm beginning to understand that, partly through working through the Delsarte material of what the Delsartians were actually doing. Henry, how does that sound? I've chucked a lot out there.
No, it sounds really interesting, and it kind of speaks to me of progression in this technique, and the fact that, you know, obviously Alexander discovered something amazing, but science is science, and science always progresses, and practice always progresses, and it does seem very sad to me that we can't have these kind of grown-up, sensible, respectful debates over the technique sometimes, and the sort of dogma gets in the way. Yeah, and it is a bit worrying, isn't it, that in a profession like ours, that sort of rational and respectful debate can sometimes descend into something else. I wonder what your thoughts are.
Yes, I completely agree. And it's, you know, I mean, at the risk of being controversial, I mean, the number of people said to me, would he have done that if I'd been a man? Would he have written something quite so, you know, almost abusive? The first version actually was abusive, and I got him to retract that.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just respond, I do know that he has criticised quite a lot of people, actually, but I've never seen it so in such a public way. So I think that was new. But I know he's launched various attacks, but on all sorts of teachers, male and female. So.
Oh, good. Right. Okay. It's good to know that. Yes, I realise I'm not alone. Quite a number of people have come up to me and said, actually, I've been attacked by him. Yes, but yes, it's very Puritan, actually. It's very, as I say, I mean, I can, in a sense, I can feel where these people are coming from, because most of them are old guard. They're trained with Carrington very often early on. Some of them trained with MacDonald very early on. And it's like they had to assume that Carrington and MacDonald, and for that matter, Marjorie Barlow, had everything that Alexander was passing down. I mean, that had to be the assumption, that they were given the whole technique. And I think we are already aware of how, you know, the Carrington people got one bit of the equation, the MacDonald bit got another, the Barlows got another, Marjorie Barstow had another bit. But if you put all those four together, I mean, people like Don Burton tried to get all teachers in his school to try and say, well, if we put all four together, do we get the whole technique? And I think the stuff that Goldie and Erica Whitaker and Irene Tasker before them had that actually never made it into mainstream training. And then what Giando's brought out is that stuff that didn't even make it as far as 1910, you know, so that even the very early people, Ethel Webb and Irene Tasker didn't even get, because it was happening even before that. So I think Alexander himself was progressing and dropping things along the way. But that's a pretty shocking thought if your whole life you've thought that your teacher gave you the whole package. So I think it's threatening, quite simply. You know, my sense is he's been threatened. I don't know. I mean, that's just putting a psychological thing on it. But Julia.
As a former pupil of the person we're talking about, I was trained that way. But I hope, moved along and become my own person. And I think what I'm hearing from the discussion is that, and what has fascinated me for a long time, and I've been thinking for a long time, but you, Penelope, are articulating it for me beautifully, thank you, is that Alexander was extraordinary in his intuition of things. There was something in that man who just, his hands and his observation, his eyes, understood things that other people simply hadn't got hold of. He didn't have the words for it and he didn't have the science for it. And I agree with you entirely that there are some teachers out there, some of us, who feel threatened by that science, confirming actually what Alexander had intuited. But there is a slight mismatch there. And I think it comes partly from our inability to place ourselves within society. We call ourselves teachers, but this the whole relationship with the NHS and all that kind of thing. We have a very complicated relationship with science altogether. I'm not a scientist and I don't have an understanding of anatomy, but it's poor compared with yours. But I admire what you've done, and I just think you're articulating what Alexander was onto. And I also think you're absolutely right that he put things down. If you read the books, by the end of Universal Control, what is it called? I can't even remember. Universal Constant Living, yes. It's very different from that first book.
Yeah.
He's put things down. He's and talking to Elizabeth Walker at the end of her life, he had stopped speaking so much. He was using his hands. And all kinds of things. He was moving on, and I think we have to respect that and perhaps move on too.
Yes, thank you for that. And and again, I'm sure you had a very good training with who you I actually took 2 lessons with him many years ago when I was still a pupil. They were the best pupil lessons I ever had. He actually taught me something, because everybody else just did things to me. He actually taught me, and I was intrigued by his work. He's a very fine teacher. But there we go. People are people. So thank you. Would anyone else like to comment or out of their own experience or Leanne?
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I am all the way from sunny South Africa. It's not snowing here. But thank you, Penelope. I have not read your book. It's very nice to see you, though, and very nice to be amongst the lot of you. I've trained under a man called Walter Vaughan Jones. I think he was taught by Walter Scott and Marjorie Barlow, or the end of her training. I think she took over when he passed away. Very kind of puristic training and very nice old school training. We also a little bit stuck in that. But I thought of asking you just a simple question. If you could formulate simply, what do you think you have added to the Alexander work? What would you, if someone had to ask you this, which I'm doing, is what do you think you brought, what have you added to what there has been already?
I think a number of things, but the absolute key, I think, is that we can step around faulty sensory perception. Because we've always been told that we can't do the technique for ourselves because of faulty sensory perception, that we cannot take ourselves into an unknown experience. And actually, a couple of people who were Alexander's pupils discovered how to do that. The first that I know of was Frank Pierce Jones. And for those who've read his books, he talks about how during his lessons with AR, he kept, every time AR tried to get him out of the chair, he jumped. And I'm sure we all know that experience. And at a certain point, he discovered that if he maintained an expanded field of an awareness, which included the whole room and himself, then he could stay somehow out of his own way, and then he could let AR take him out of the chair, and he could allow something different to happen. And then he discovered that actually he could do that for himself. And that when he did that, he got an even better result. It held better. And that, although Goldie didn't name it, that's what she taught me. She taught me to stay out of the way. And the room would come three-dimensional for me, and I'd be very much aware of the whole room being present. And so I've thought to myself, well, if when she brought me to that place of quiet, the room comes three-dimensional, can I do it the other way around? So if using my natural vision work, I bring the room three-dimensional, does that get me out of my own way? And the answer was, yes, it was. It works. And I then put that with the science of McGilchrist, the left-right brain, because the left brain works from the, which is, after all, what our society, our school taught us absolutely to live in, teaches us how to work from the known and to be very suspicious of anything that's unknown. And spatial awareness is entirely lateralized to the right side of the brain. And if we can come into spatial awareness, we come into the right side of the brain, we come into a relationship with ourselves and with our environment together. And we also come into a place of curiosity rather than judgment, which I think is also part of the answer to your question, Henry, that we're not using that enough. If we're living out of judgment still a bit, then we'll criticize each other. And there is a lot of criticism in the technique. And I do wonder if we could all move into this more and learn how to do this right brain experience, and be more embodied in our understanding of the technique. We might actually be less critical and kinder of each other, because it includes the center of intelligences of the heart rather than just being a brain led. So I think there's a wider application to that as well. Embodiment is also right hemisphere lateralized. Thank you, Henry. Yes, indeed, that's right. So, and that's why I can give you the instructions from the book, and you can actually read the book, put it into play yourself without a teacher, and actually give yourself a whole new experience, or I can do it with you online. And I think that's really clarified how we can do it for ourselves. And the rest then follows from that. What does that sound like, Leanne?
Yeah, that's very succinct. Thank you. Thank you. Sometimes I think we have a line drawing problem. Like there's this very pure, like the perfect human that has no tension and is totally inhibited and wonderfully everything, and it's over here. And then the world that's trying to get to that place and find different ways of being embodied in here, and then there's just different. Yeah, I think people are also different, as you say. Maybe Alexander was probably quite spatially intelligent and had his own natural abilities, and not everyone's the same. People have different languages, but we're all going towards the same place, I think.
Actually, I think that's exactly why Alexander didn't name spatial awareness, because he already had it.
Yeah, probably.
And people who already have spatial awareness, it's like, what's the big deal? But those of us who are short-sighted and have seen the world in 2D, the day you come 3D, it's like, one of the biggest moments of your life. It's a revelation. I thought I was having a spiritual experience the first time I saw in 3D. It was that striking to my whole being, and I'm not alone in that. Yes, thank you for that question. Anyone want to let's do a little game on integration, which is something that it's not directly a Goldie game, but it's something that evolved out of her work, just to show the difference between just release and tone. So if everyone's up for this, just lift a shoulder in a way you would normally not want to do, and just think, I can do less with my shoulder, or I let my shoulder be free, or whatever your inhibited sentence is, and let it release. Okay. Now we're going to do exactly the same thing. Lift the shoulder again. And this time you're going to say, I can do less with my shoulder, or whatever your sentence is. And don't let it release, but just keep saying just keep saying the sentence over and over. And let something sort itself out, but don't do the release. I can do less with my shoulder. I can do less with my shoulder. I can do less with my shoulder. And if you look around as you're doing this, look around and see the room, I can do less with my shoulder. So you're coming into a relationship with your room. I can do less with my shoulder. I can do less with my shoulder. Let's see what happens. I can do less with my shoulder. 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 I'm letting the process sort itself. I can do less with my shoulder. 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 Anyone aware of a difference of what's happened? What you're aware of at this point compared to the first time? Would anyone like to venture a difference? Borrit.
Yes, thank you so much, Penelope. I want to thank you first because this is very interesting, really. I mean, I can relate in many ways. I'm actually a trained historian, and I don't work as a historian, but I'm a trained historian, so I have great interest in it. And also, I'm a big animal lover, so I can relate to that too. And but I am a yoga teacher. And I do my way of approaching the Alexander technique is really through the yoga, because I live in Sweden and there is no training here. But I would call myself a trainee, because I have learned a lot from different teachers, and I do teach myself in my way, but I don't call myself an Alexander teacher. So with this little game that we did now, the first time is there was more like just centered to the shoulder, but the second time it kind of involved the whole body much more. That was quite noticeable, actually. Yeah, down to the, since I'm sitting down, it was down to my sitting bones, my pelvis, and my whole back, and so and the space around me, the space within. So yes, it was a difference.
Yes, thank you. Did anyone else experience that, or something similar, or something completely different? Yes. Did anyone go, what's that about? That's so this was Leanne. Yes, you're muted. Can you unmute?
Sorry. The first one shows up how much breaking there is between now and now. Whereas if you do it like that, you stay integrated in the whole thing, and you obviously wake up inside the bits and pieces of the space in a second, and so also does your body. And then the integration is wonderful. It's remarkable.
Thank you. Yes, and that's very much what Goldie's work was about. It was about that integration, and I think certainly in my experience, I've had a lot of turns from people who just worked on my shoulder. Goldie never just worked on a shoulder. I think it's very easy for us to start separating. It was always whole body. And this thing about the time it takes to integrate, it doesn't just happen. And that's why I talk about inhibition being a state, not an on-off process. It's actually a state that one enters. Tessa.
Hi, Penelope. It's wonderful to have this discussion. It's been amazing to connect again. and everybody's input. It's been really, really interesting. I think for me with the game, it immediately freed my breathing, which I found interesting. And that somehow filled everything. And now I have a full shoulder.
Yes.
Yes, it really from the inside out.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. So your shoulder got embodied. Yes.
Yeah.
Julia, I think you were just ahead of Nicola there. Yeah, go on.
Just to say, I felt exactly the same as Tessa, but also the fact that it's so surprising when one's attention is brought to the breath so easily, because one feels that, you know, it should be there all the time, that awareness. But that fantastic sort of acknowledgement of it, really.
Mm.
I also was, the awareness grew, you know, much more than just in the room. And I could see a monkjack deer in the garden. Normally that would be a bit irritating, but actually it became not irritating. It was okay to let it be in the garden without the need to chase it out. So yeah, breathing does a lot, really.
Yeah, lovely. Yes, and you could just be with what was rather than trying to do something about it. Thank you. Lovely. Nicola, you had your hand up for a moment.
I noticed that with the first movement, there was a starting and a stopping, whereas with the second movement, and I still feel it now, I feel that effect of the continued attention in my shoulder, in the shoulder I raised, so that the effect of the thinking and the repeating of that phrase and the spatial, you know, the visual aspect are ongoing. There is a continuity to it. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. And again, this comes back to Ian McGilchrist's concept of how the left and right hemispheres work, that the left hemisphere is the mechanical side of the brain, that his images of a bird under a feeder going, it has to identify, say, a sunflower seed and go peck. So you identify what you're doing and you go, got it. And then it identifies a millet seed and it goes, got it. And it's very task oriented, and it's stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. There's actually no flow in it. Whereas the right brain is what the bird also needs in order to stay safe, because the right brain is doing something completely different. It's got an overall focus of the entire scene to watch for the unexpected. So it's watching for cats, it's watching for birds of prey, it's watching for the rest of the flock are doing, what relationships are happening within the flock. It's got all that sensing, curiosity, open to the unknown. And this is McGilchrist's point that, you know, the bird under the feeder has two entirely different brain necessities, one to identify the food and get it, and the other to keep this overall picture. And he says nature is very clever, it puts it on two sides of the brain. And in fact, that separation, it's all the way back into reptiles and frogs. And apparently, I think it's frogs, you can creep up on them more easily on the left than on the right. So there's and ducks, chickens, I think as well, you can creep up them on one side, not the other side. So but we have, you know, crossings to our brain, so that we're not so aware of it as being a left-right thing, but it's there. And that left side of the brain has no sense of flow. It's stop, go, stop, go. Whereas the right side of the brain, it's where we experience music and poetry and dancing, you know, and all that stuff that has flow to it. And this again, back to Leanne's question of what am I bringing that's different, is Goldie's concept of inhibition wasn't stop go. That's what we've just been playing with. It was coming into an ongoing state of quiet, which actually you can then live in. And, I think books that talk about being in the zone or being in the flow, that this is actually the state one comes into. People doing parkour across rooftops, that incredible stuff where they're jumping across a gap and catching a rail and then doing a somersault and landing. They have to be in an overall state of spatial awareness that can make choices on the hoof. And I think that's what Goldie's work was after. So,
Thank
Henry.
Yeah, just going back to the exercise or the exploration or the game again, I sort of following on from what Nicola was saying. For me, the first version was a a kind of tension and then a collapse and probably another kind of tension, a pull down of some kind, and then the other version was starting from that place of holding, but then releasing into what I'm guessing is more of a kind of appropriate sort of tone in this area, probably connected to an overall integration. I mean, that's my experience and also my assumption of something of what might have been going on.
I think Goldie would absolutely agree with you, because she would tell me that in my idea of releasing the shoulder, I was actually collapsing it. And the only time I saw Marge Barstow was in action was in a masterclass, and she went around telling people they'd got that what they thought was shoulder release was actually shoulder collapse. And that again, once this, these things that Patrick Johnson doesn't like, but he does admit that this is a good model for the balance of fascia, because if these are the bones and these are the elastic bands, these are the ligaments and the tendons and the muscles, every single one of those has to be working in balance. And I think that's what Alexander meant by antagonistic action, position, mechanical advantage, is that every single muscle in the body is in play. There is, the standard idea of antagonistic action is, your quad works, then your hamstring, then your quad, then your hamstring. It's switch on, switch off. This allows no switch off. And Miss Goldie once said to me, there is no switching off. We have to be maintaining tone. And in fact, I even found Carrington's diary that he wrote in 1946 or thereabouts. And I think it was there, or was it Binkley? I forget, it's one of those, where he suddenly discovers that what he thinks is doing too much with his neck, he's told, actually, you're doing too little. So, it's a very different way of thinking. There is no switching off. We just have to let everything integrate, and then the neck is supported. Julia. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go on, Henry. Just
briefly, just reminded me. Tim Cacciatore was talking recently about. I've forgotten the percentage, but he was saying postural tone. It's using something like 5% of the muscle capability around the body, but it's there, right? So it's really interesting to me.
Yes, and the more we've got every muscle in play in that, the more you really are ready for everything. You might have seen that I occasionally give a workshop called "Why We All Want to Be James Bond," because I think when the whole muscle body is toned in this way, we really are ready for anything. That's an ideal. Julia.
Do you think one has to experience collapse for what it is in order to build, though?
I think that we only know what we're doing out of contrast. So, in a sense, yes, people who have always been beautifully toned don't know why they're toned, don't know how they're toned. Those of us who've been through collapse and rebuilt it know what it is. So I'm not sure whether that answers your question. Yeah. So let me talk a little bit more about the book study club, because I say the next group starts in, well, 10 days time, I think it is. It's on a Monday. It's at 5 o'clock UK time, the seminars this time. And they last 90 minutes each time, except I often overrun by a few minutes. I'm a lousy timekeeper. I get too enthusiastic. And we meet fortnightly. Thank you, Jane. Good to see you. Nice to see you. And we work slowly through the book. We take part of a chapter each time, and we discuss the theory. We play with the explorations. But part of it is that everybody has a study buddy. If people really don't want to, that's fine too. Some people don't. But the majority of people take a study buddy and they meet with their study buddy in between, and they play with all the explorations first of that little section. And that gives them the chance not just to experience it being led through by somebody else and to play with it with another teacher, but also to discover how to verbalize it yourself. Because as teachers, it's one thing to experience something, it's another thing to learn how to teach it. And so I want all the teachers, and trainees for that matter as well, to immediately have the experience of how do I take somebody else through this process and learn how to verbalize it. Because most of us, our training was mostly about hands, and if you have your hands available and you're in the same room, you can sort of mush your way through sometimes and find out what's happening. If you're working online, you can't do that. You actually have to really look at the person and think about what that body needs in that moment. Does it need to take the head a bit forwards and up? Are the shoulders a bit collapsed? Has the breathing stopped? And then you need to find the appropriate words to direct them, and also to be very alive to then what happens with the language. Has that language brought them into life? Has that language subtly shut them down? And if you're playing with that with another teacher, then you've got that feedback straight away. Oh yes, that wording shut me down, that wording woke me up, and you're also getting the other person to give you feedback. Because so often, you say to a pupil, how was that? And they go, yeah, tell me more. Yeah, it was nice. Yes. What happened? My neck. Yes, tell me more. And then eventually they're able to articulate, oh yes, my neck now turns freely. It feels there's more space in it. And the more you can articulate, the pupil can articulate this stuff. And again, this is something Alexander just didn't do. He didn't get the pupil giving feedback. He probably thought it. I think, again, the old way of thinking was that pupils will give wrong feedback and it's not worthwhile. But to me, that's like the doctor telling you what your body's doing and not listening to your testimony. We've got to get the pupils giving feedback. And that also really consolidates what they know has happened. And then they're much more likely to go away and recognize, oh yeah, I'm on my phone and I've crunched it now. What was the instruction? So there's a whole load here, whether you work online or whether you work in hands or whether you're working with Alexander pupils or yoga pupils. I think, thank you, Borit. There's a lot we can learn about verbalizing and directing and observing and getting feedback. So that's a sort of added bonus of the book study club is the buddies. And then when we get together in the session, we go through it again. I can give feedback where people are, for those who want to be watched. And we have a lot of fun. We make a lot of discoveries, and people can brainstorm a difficult pupil, and there's a lot of support. And they become very close-knit groups. And so I don't know whether anyone is interested in doing that. I hope you are. And the price, by the way, I keep it low because I know we're all like church mice. So we're not a rich profession. So the price is only $25 a month. And also for those who can't even afford $25 a month, there's an option of $20 a month. And it's just, it makes it very affordable. And we just, as I say, the group keeps going until the book is finished, but there's no upfront commitment. So, you know, you can try it for a month and see whether it's right for you. And if it isn't, you just drop out, and there's no financial, you know, commitment up front. And so I do hope that you'll look at it. I've actually put the link in the chat below to the landing page. I'll post it there again just now, and I'll send you the link afterwards in an email, and I'll also send everybody the recording. Would anyone like to ask questions about the about any of this or about the club? That's Sarah, would you like to say a little bit about it, because you're in the Australian group? Would you be willing to? Sarah, are you there? Are you willing to say anything?
I'm here. Yes, it's wonderful. I encourage people to do the book club. It's great to go through the book and have Penelope there to clarify something. It's just great to have you there, Penelope, as we work through it. And there's so much in the book. It's wonderful. We've been doing it, I don't know how long, Penelope. It's over a year now, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every fortnight.
Yeah.
So I really would encourage people to do it. I've got so much.
Thank you. And we're really seeing people change, aren't we? I mean, several people in your group now can squat, having come to the group with incredibly bad knees and really thinking they would never squat again in their lives. And yeah, so it's been amazing watching people change. Yes, there was another question there. What was it? Oh, yes. What if you haven't got the book back yet? Well, you'll need to order a copy of the book. And if it hasn't arrived when the club starts, then I sort out a copy of the first chapter for you until your book arrives. So not a problem. Nicholas, and then Tina.
Hi, can you hear me, Penelope?
Yes, I can, Nicholas.
Yeah, everyone else, lovely to hear you as well. What are some of the practical applications you did? Because you're saying you can like get people together and watch them, and you just gave another example of people doing squats and that improving their use of movements. What were some of the practical applications rather than sort of like some of the practical applications rather than sort of discussions?
Oh yes, I mean the activities. Some of them are bending in and out of a chair, which is it can be practical or it can be an exploration on its own, as you know. But yes, I do very much encourage people when we do the walking chapter, apply it to your daily walk with the dog. What happened when you then went up a mountain? When we do the chapter on arms, we really look at how people are washing up, how people open the Ziploc bag, how you turn on a tap. So I think, is that what you mean? That
like if we're all together now, would you be asking us to go away and explore those particular activities, or would there be like you like sort of coaching people, guiding people, or giving people suggestions and ideas about watching maybe someone play like maybe like Henry might be playing his cello or something in the background. I don't actually do that application work usually. We work through the explorations in the book, which are, one of the ones is like tracking eyes and just, how is it to track the eyes? Does the head turn? What's happening with your eyes? One can pay incredible detail to actually what's happening with the mind, with where we're thinking from. And then like coming into squat, again, where is going down? So that's where, again, I really want to watch people as they're doing it. And I've got a big computer here, so I can see people, I can bring people up and, watch them in detail. And if somebody's having struggle in getting out of the chair, to be able to do a one-on-one with them within the context of the group. So it's very much our Alexander work that we're going through, rather than application work in the way the Barstows might do of, what should we pick this week and who wants to work with dancing or whatever. But, if somebody wants to bring in something,
that's fine. I mean, in chapter 14, we do some yoga. So we go beyond the book, where it feels right. And I also talk people through the first generation procedures, hands on back of chair and lifting back in chair, which aren't actually described in the book. But what we've done in the book really takes one to the point where you can do those in a different way. And then how does hands on back of chair then relate when you come to open a Ziploc bag, for instance, or stir a saucepan? So does that make sense, Nicholas? Does that answer your question, or am I?
I mean, it's just what you've been showing today is amazing. It's a really generous offer, and I'd like to come and join the group, and I'll look at your landing page. And is it once a week every Monday? Is it like term time dates or stuff like that?
No, we work every fortnight, actually, to give people time between to go through the explorations, do the reading. So there's no pressure to do it every week. So we make it fortnightly. We take a month in the summer, we take a month at Christmas, but otherwise we just keep going. I mean, I said to the guys who are in the groups at the moment, do you want to work on Good Friday or not? And they all said, yes, we'll work on Good Friday. And the same with the Easter Monday groups. Yep, we'll work on Easter Monday. So I give the group the option, and they just want to keep going, which I think speaks volumes, really.
Thank you, Penelope. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Tina. Or Tina, I don't know. Are you Tina or?
Tineke.
Tineke. Oh,
Tineke, yes.
Thank you.
Hello, nice to be here. My question is, how big will the group be of the book study club, more or less?
Well, good question. The last two groups have actually started with a slightly overwhelming number. We've actually had like 46 people on the first screen, but it doesn't stay that big. A lot of people actually turn up for the first session and then have already told me that they can't come they usually can't get to seminars. And so very quickly it comes to a group of about 20, which is, and sometimes people are there, sometimes aren't. And the others are working from the recordings and keeping up that way. And some people choose to go at a slower pace. They use the recordings, but they just take it in their own time. There's a couple of dyslexics who are working in the background, very much doing it at their own pace, because being dyslexic, they don't want to be, they don't want to feel chased to keep up. So and again, as we go on, it's around about 15, somewhere between 15 and 20. And then towards the end, it's somewhere between 10 and 15 as more people are working in the background. So it's a nice size group. It's not a...
For me,
go on.
For me, it seems a good option, but I just want to have the time to think it over quietly.
Sure. Yes.
Before registering myself. So will there be a stop that you say, no, I can't accept anyone anymore?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I prefer that people are there on the first session, because the first session we just all meet each other. Thank you, Nicola. Good to see you. But the cutoff is a month, because by then you're having to catch up. And so join in and try it. I mean, I'd suggest, and it doesn't feel right.
That's not what I meant. What I mean is that I want to register maybe a week before you start, and you say now I have many people and you can't join.
Oh yes. So once I mean, there will come a point where if it starts going above 50, that's enough.
Okay. Thank you.
But as I say, we never get 50 people turning up because you don't. So there's always more people registered than one ever sees, because there's always really quite a group working in the background who just can't do Mondays. So that's it works out to being a human level. That I think sometimes people panic the very first time, thinking, my God, there's a lot of people here, but it very quickly settles down.
Thank you.
Yes, because I know as Alexander teachers, we don't like being in big groups where we don't feel we can be heard. I mean, that's something our profession doesn't like, which is entirely understandable. So good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So, any more questions? And Andrea, how are you hearing it all?
Sorry to, yeah, grand thanks, Penelope. I was really interested to see where you'd got to since the book, you know, having read it with a fine-tooth comb enough to do a review. So
Yes.
yeah, that's really interesting. Enjoyed the exercise as well.
Good, thank you. Right, so are there any more questions? And then we'll draw to an end. People have been creeping away, and so thank you all for coming today. It's been.
Bye.
Thank you. And I'll send you all an email later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Nice.
Thank you, Penelope.
Thank you. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Margie.